Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Los Angeles Public Library recognizes and acknowledges the first peoples of this land. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Indigenous peoples today. I'm Todd LaRue, Director of Special Projects for the Library Foundation of Los Angeles. Wow, thanks. I'm excited too. I'm so glad to welcome you here this afternoon for the Baseball Reliquary's Shrine of the Eternals ceremony. Yeah. The program here today is produced in association with our Something in Common exhibition, which features the Baseball Reliquary, among other fascinating groups that foster a sense of belonging through shared interests and celebrate our public libraries as welcoming spaces open to all. If you've not yet seen the exhibition, please make your way up to the Getty Gallery on the second floor of this library following the program, as this show goes away after tomorrow, and we're open until 5:30 today. For those not familiar with the Library Foundation of Los Angeles, we're a nonprofit devoted to advocacy and fundraising, as well as innovative programming in support of the Los Angeles Public Library. Thank you to any Los Angeles Library Foundation members who are here today. And if you're not a member, consider joining to support critical programs like Read Baby Read, Career Online High School, and Adult Literacy, which help so many Angelenos of all ages improve their lives and achieve their dreams. We'll have more information in the courtyard during the reception that will follow the program. As curator of the Something in Common exhibition and myself a member of the Baseball Reliquary, I have to admit, and I know I'm not the only one, that I wasn't drawn to this group because of any particular personal appreciation for baseball per se. For me, it was enough to see how the stories of incredible as well as ordinary people who animate the history of the sport can be explored and celebrated for what they teach us about the history of our nation and our community, as well as the follies and triumphs of our shared humanity. Reliquarians in the audience, you know the bittersweetness of our gathering today in light of the tragic and untimely passing of Terry Cannon, the Reliquary's creator and visionary founding director in 2020. It's therefore particularly meaningful to have the opportunity to honor and remember him here, and I'm grateful to Mary Cannon, as well as to Joe Price, Charles Adams, and Greg Jaszewski for their dedication in reviving the Reliquary and moving it forward with the combination of joy, wonder, pure comedy, and the real sense of the social obligations we have to one another that makes this group so unique. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce our Master of Ceremonies for today's program. Joe Price is the Emeritus Professor of Religious Studies at Whittier College, where he taught for 36 years. He's the co-founder and director of the Institute for Baseball Studies. In recent years, he led students on travel courses to study baseball as a Caribbean religion, and following retirement, he returned to campus to teach a course on the history of the Negro Leagues. Combining his loves of sports and religion, his books include Rounding the Bases, Baseball and Religion in America, and Perfect Pitch, the national anthem for a national pastime, a chronicle of his tour during the 2011 baseball season when he sang the Star-Spangled Banner at more than 100 minor league ballparks in 40 states. So one can easily see why he was identified personally by Terry Cannon to succeed him as executive director for the Baseball Reliquary. Please help me welcome Joe Price.
What a cowbell symphony. How wonderful it is to hear this music again. It is my privilege to welcome you to the 22nd induction ceremony for the Shrine of the Eternals, an event that was postponed 2 years ago because of COVID protocols. Now, with the extensive support of the Library Foundation of Los Angeles and the creative work of Todd LaRue and the staff at the Library Foundation, we are delighted to reconvene the members of the Reliquary to induct the class of 2020, elected in that year. It is at this time that I invite to the stage Byron Motley to sing the national anthem and to lead us in the chorus, "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." Byron is the son of former Negro Leagues umpire Bob Motley, who was a pioneer African-American umpire in the Pacific Coast League. An accomplished author, recording artist, photographer, filmmaker, Byron has been featured in multiple programs sponsored by the Baseball Reliquary. Now, if you are able, please rise for the singing of the Star-Spangled Banner.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? Play ball. And please sing this along with me when he starts to play it.
Muscles are a mighty sight to see.
Not that one. Here it comes, though. Dun, 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 dun. Music is coming. Keep your fingers crossed. And I think you'll all recognize this from the Ken Burns documentary on baseball. Here we go. Come on, sing it, everybody. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out with the crowd. Root for the... Knew that was coming. For it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. You can dance a little bit if you want to. Or keep singing. We're going to sing it one more time from the beginning. 1, 2, and here we get ready to go. Come on. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out with the crowd. Buy me some. I don't care. If I ever get back, let me root for the... Well, it's a shame, for it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. I don't care who got root for. Let me root for the... Royals. I'm from Kansas City, okay? 2, 3 strikes, you're out in the old ball game. Play ball. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Byron. We would not be here today without the incredible vision and the indefatigable work of Terry Cannon. In so many respects, he was a passionate genius. He conceived and directed our radical grassroots baseball fans organization, and he curated dozens and dozens of vivid educational exhibits that featured the heart of the game. And with him and 2 faculty colleagues at Whittier College, we created to establish the Institute for Baseball Studies, where the Reliquary's archives and artifacts now reside. Here, to deliver the keynote tribute to Terry, is Tomas Benitez, who is the Director of Development at Plaza de la Raza Cultural Center for the Arts and Education in East Los Angeles. It provides intergenerational arts programs that bridge social, artistic, and cultural boundaries. More importantly for his relationship with Terry, Tomas collaborated with him in writing for the Latino Baseball History Project, whose success garnered National Award and spawned a dozen books on Mexican-American baseball histories in California communities. Please welcome to the podium Tomas to deliver the tribute.
You see this? Terry was a Tiger fan. I traveled in another lifetime around the Midwest and the South a lot. And one of my passions was to go to a lot of minor league baseball games. So I actually got to see Max Patkin perform live and entertain the crowd like a half a dozen times. And each time was just a treasure. So it is one, huh? I got to see Max Patkin perform a half dozen times. So it was really a pleasure to do that, and I'm glad he's here today being honored, or rather we're here today honoring him. He's here, but I mean, he's not going to say anything. Same with Terry. Terry's in the room. Is not Terry in the room? Yeah. You're damn straight, right? I got his hat. I'm sorry?
Mary has his picture.
Oh, I can't see that far. That's you, Mary? Oh, okay, that's Terry and Mary. Okay, together again. There are some people who do not like baseball. Mary will testify. She's had people come up to her at the Reliquary events and say, I don't like baseball. But they like the Reliquary because of what it represents. There are some people who do like baseball. And then there are those of us who love baseball. Terry Cannon built a big Chautauqua tent that was big enough to host all of us in it. His own irreverence for commercially driven and stodgier elements of the game were edified in his often described description of the Baseball Reliquary as a place for people who love baseball in spite of the professional sport. But he also understood fan loyalty. Even if it were fans of the 1919 White Sox, the 62 Mets, or a Detroit Tiger young pitcher who would talk to the ball while standing on the mound. You see, there is room for oddity inside that big tent. There is room for glorious imperfection, which, like art, gives baseball its core beauty. Terry loved the game for all of that. It was and is but also what was beyond the game, the sheer magic, mythology, and quirkiness of baseball. More than what takes place between the lines, on the grass, or in the dirt. Baseball is a game that is driven by data. From perusing the daily box score and trying to figure out, Leslie, how it is that they had 7 left on base and they only had 3 hits or 3 walks. We finally figured that it was a typo. Or the many, many books by Bill James and others. Baseball compares itself against the timeline of its entire history, yet it remains timeless. It is not measured by a clock or a countdown. And in there is always the mystery, the anguish, and the surprise. I've often said baseball is a cruel game, but it can also be exhilarating. But in those crevices, the cracks in the facade, out of the limelight, perhaps even hidden from us on purpose, Terry found the real treasure, Eddie Gaedell's jockstrap. A cigar butt taken from a sporting house that was allegedly left behind by the great Babe Ruth. And of course, my favorite, un tortilla, with Walter O'Malley's face burnished into the surface. Ah, yes, the artifacts, indeed. He understood the creativity in all things, including baseball, art from Ben Sakaguchi, Steven Stievenmeyer, Joe Flo, also known as Joe Flo. Filmmaking from John, music performances, including Byron. An entire CD dedicated to Jackie Robinson. Poetry readings. All of it. I mean, where do you get a person to play the national anthem while standing upside down? Even the art and culture of Baseball Reliquary has a sense of oddity. His early career as the founder of the Pasadena Film Forum, as well as being one of the key founders of the Doodah Parade. Did you know that? I guess you did. I mean, doesn't it make sense now that you know it? It's like I'm this many days old until I realized, oh, Terry was, well, of course he was. Of course he was. I am not an animal, I am a rutabaga. I mean, somebody said that to me at a Doodah. Guy come up dressed as a rutabaga. I'm not an animal, I'm a rutabaga. Terry gave us that. Or starting a magazine for fixing old Studebakers. I mean, doesn't that sound like Terry? Well, I've got this magazine where we fix old Studebakers. Yeah, that's Terry. All indicated that he was an inventive genius with a creative vision. He saw the landscape beyond the there that was there. He saw the landscape beyond the there that was there. That is a creative vision. I met Terry at the art gallery at Self-Help Graphics, where I was the executive director at the time. I had heard about him, or rather the Baseball Reliquary, from Pat Gomez, my associate, who told me of this odd show as part of the Pasadena Art Night. A baseball exhibit as part of an art night? And what oddities are in the show, did you say? A piece of human skin? A worn-out, infamous G-string? Oh, yes, I had to meet Terry and Mary Cannon, yes. When I first met him, I joked that he looked like Rich Rollins, with that shock of red hair and his spectacles. Thereafter, for as long as we were friends, every time I talked to Terry, he would remind me he did not look anything like Rich Rollins. And that was our through line until one day I ate the last tapioca pudding at Tui's before he could order it. Thereafter, remember that time you ate that tapioca? Yes, I do. God, I wish I'd let him have it. Now, all of us have a Terry Cannon story. That's the kind of guy he was. His temperament, his character, his influence, his charm. Cesar Caballero will tell you, at his meeting with Terry, Cesar was the librarian at the JFK Library at Cal State LA. Terry pitched the idea for a show about the history of Mexican Americans in baseball. An utterly brilliant idea. Baseball is endemic to the social cultural life of the Mexican American communities. Cesar leapt at the opportunity and said, yes, let's do it. What have you got to show? And Terry told him, well, not a damn thing.
But these many years later, we've had several exhibitions. We've collaborated with Smithsonian. We have a substantial archive at the Fowle Library at Cal State San Bernardino, and nearly 20 books stewarded by the wonderful Dr. Richard Santillan on Latino and Mexican-American baseball in California and half the Southwest and even the Midwest United States. Terry gave us that. He had an idea. He had a vision. Terry and Mary, God bless her, not only were the founders of the Baseball Reliquary, along with Buddy Kilchesty, they also lived it. And by that, I mean the little home was a repository of the most precious artifacts. From wall to wall, floor to ceiling, closets, stacks of documents and records that took up an entire spare bedroom and spilled into their own. And that was only a portion of the collection. They had a whole storage space for the bulk of the collection. You know that well, don't you, Joe? But Terry knew that there had to be a more permanent repository for the Baseball Reliquary, and he worked hard at it, and was finally able to partner with Joe Price to establish the Institute of Baseball Studies at Whittier College. I know it came as a relief to him that there would be a place for the collection after he moved on. And there it is today, thanks to Joe and a number of others. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Joe. All right, almost, not quite. I think Terry was that kid in the hood who took care of his toys. You know the one? A little nerdy but mindful. I played baseball games with my baseball cards. My Koufax card had a left bent because he was a lefty. Willie Mays had a right bent because he hit right-handed. My Maury Wills card always slid headfirst into second or third on the carpet in my living room or on the concrete out on my porch. A 1962 Maury Wills baseball card. But there was no mistaking that Terry, a library tech by profession, knew the value of the preservation of history and an archive. Terry saved and protected our history. Terry saved and protected the beauty of baseball. Terry saved and protected the beauty of baseball. But why was it so important to do this work? Where did his passion come from? I venture to speculate that because to most of us of our generation, look around, we're talking about our generation, baseball represents our childhood. Keeping it well taken care of, keeping it as it was, allows us to, for at least a few moments, to touch upon the best of our early years. It was always about the game, this simple, beautiful game of hitting a round object with another round object or a rock with a stick. And if you played well, or if you just played enough, you got to go home again. Ah, baseball. Terry has gone home again, but he is very present. We are here today because who he was and what he did. He is in this room now, a tribute to his creative vision. Terry is alive in our hearts and our minds through the Baseball Reliquary, the Institute of Baseball Studies, and the Shrine of the Eternals. Thank you, nuestro amigo. I hope you get all the tapioca pudding you want. So we're going to do a shout-out. In Latin American countries, when you want to call the ancestors, you say their name, and then you shout presente. So I'm going to say Terry's name, and you're going to shout back to me presente. We're going to do it 3 times. Terry Cannon. Presente. Terry Cannon. Presente. Una más grande. Terry Cannon. Presente. Yes, all right, thank you.
If you want to.
Oh, yes.
Mary Cannon commissioned this Shrine of the Eternals tribute to Terry. And we have a ball, the only baseball that Terry Cannon signed, thanks to Julian Pollock. Ask him about that story during the reception. The bell ringing that signaled the beginning of this induction ceremony pays tribute to the Queen of Cacophony, Hilda Chester, whose clanging cowbells assaulted the ears of the Ebbets Field faithful for more than 30 years. By some, she was called sweetly demented. By others, raucous or obnoxious. Recognizing Hilda's distinct baseball fervor, the Baseball Reliquary's annual Fandom Award is named in her honor. Presenting the award this year is Emma Amaya, recipient of the Hilda Award in 2013. She has the distinction of being the first Hilda winner to have a song written about her, Our Lady of Chavez Ravine, a ballad that was composed and performed by folk singer Ross Altman, who earlier received the Tony Salin Award. And we welcome Emma to the podium now to present the Hilda Award.
Thank you, Joe. Welcome, everybody. So good to be back here. Yay. Joe Boujoukos has gone batty with his fandom for the Boston Red Sox. During spring training in Florida 30 years ago, he began collecting game-used bats. His first bat is his favorite, not only because it got him started in his pursuit, and not only because it was personally handed to him by Mike Bromley, a utility infield who only had one at-bat that year. It is his favorite because Bromley's name was misspelled by Louisville Slugger. The bat read Mike Bromley. After his collection had reached 50 bats, he set a goal of collecting a bat used by every position player to suit up for the Red Sox since 1960. He has searched for and acquired bats by attending team events, placing ads in Sports Collectors Digest, and perusing eBay's and auction catalogs. No phones, in those days. So by mid-season of 2018, Jeff had collected more than 750 bats in a range of colors that included several 2007 Mother's Day's Miracle pink bats. No two bats are identical, and there is a story for every bat, a true labor of love. Some bats are still so sticky with pine tar that they feature some shells of sunflower seeds or grass that stayed affixed after a home run toss. I'm over here picturing Manny Ramirez, tossing a bat. Among his collection is one of Ted Williams with autographs by the kid and his teammates. One was splintered by Big Pappy over his knees, and another one, which was perhaps not game use, is an obvious cork bat of Jose Offerman. When Jeff is not chasing bats by new players or others who simply shared a cup of coffee with the Bo Sox, Jeff advises clients on corporate and business transactions as well as environmental and sustainability issues. For professional work, he has been given the Arthur F. Matthews Award by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. Now, for his passionate pursuit of game-used bats, he's recognized by the Baseball Reliquary with the Hilda Award. We are delighted that he's here to personally accept the honor as we unveil the 2020 Hilda. Please give a warm welcome to Jeff.
So, Emma, thank you so much for that introduction. You stole a little bit of my thunder, but I'll make do. Because of COVID, I never had the pleasure of meeting Terry Cannon. We spoke briefly about my collection and corresponded a bit about the Hilda Award. So my understanding of the reliquary comes principally from research. That being said, the more I read about the reliquary, the more I understood that Terry and I are truly kindred spirits. And what enthralled him about baseball and the Baseball Reliquary was in many ways the same thing for me and my collection. My love of the Red Sox started at birth when my grandmother on my mother's side, a longtime Red Sox season ticket holder, passed on to me what was aptly described as a fatal virus, a love for the Red Sox. She would save the Boston Globe, and I would devour the articles and clip the pictures to make posters in my room. My bat collection, as Emma said, started 30 years ago during spring training, which is really the first intersection between my collection and the principles that govern the reliquary. Sometimes the oddity is the most entertaining part about baseball. So as Emma said, Mike Brumley handed me this baseball bat on the AAA field in Winter Haven, where I was standing alone, and he grumbled to me, "They got my name wrong." But it was wrapped in tape, so I didn't know. So I took it back home. I thought it was interesting, and I got Sports Illustrated, the baseball issue, and I read, well, things were so tough in the Red Sox camp that Mike Brumley's bats came in Mike Bumley. And I peeled off the tape, and it said Mike Bumley. And I thought to myself, as a baseball player, where you have to build on confidence, what would it be like to walk up to the plate every time and see a bat that calls you a bum? So anyway, I was hooked. As Emma said, a couple of years after that, I set this goal that I never thought I was going to reach, which is to try to collect a game-used baseball bat from every position player for the Red Sox from 1960 to the present. Last year for Williams, year before Yastrzemski, my favorite player, started, so it just kind of made sense, and it gave me something to shoot at. One interesting, well, first of all, there was no internet. So at the time, I had to go back to media guides, programs, even to create the list. The list itself was a research project. One interesting fact about game-used bats is that the players oftentimes write their number on the knob. And so if you really want to collect game-used baseball bats from the time when the player played for the team, you want to find one with a number that he wore when he was playing for the team. That meant going back to programs, the sporting news, old school research. So that's my second intersection with the reliquary. I'm sure that Terry would agree that this type of research project was truly a very reliquarian pursuit. Now, Ron Shelton, the author and director of Bull Durham and a friend of Terry's, remarked when discussing the reliquary, and I'll quote, "Academy Awards are always won by movie stars. Yet everyone else who carries their water and makes them look good, the character actors, are more interesting than the movie stars." And that's my third intersection. Revel in the character actors. My collection is filled with character actors. And some of my most thrilling finds are those incredibly obscure players, tougher than the Hall of Famers, and just for me, more exciting to find. A basic reality of my pursuit is that people just didn't keep character actor bats. They threw them out, they used them in playgrounds, they taped them up, they beat them till they're unrecognizable in condition. And I have a couple of those in my collection. In my collection, like in the reliquary, every player is an equal, Hall of Famer or September call-up. So as Emma noted, right now I have close to 1,000 bats. Yes, the Patty, my wife, yes, it is 1,000, now you know. And I have an example from 554 of the 559 position players who ever had an at-bat for the Red Sox from 1960 to the present. And 4 of those 5 were in the last year. Thank you, Chain Bloom and the Red Sox, for the revolving roster that always makes my task challenging. Every new player is added to the list, and 99% of the bats I have are game used. As an aside, if anybody knows Ron Mayhay, I need an upgrade, so look me up afterwards. That's a huge pile of bats accumulating in my house, and I'm sure that my wife Patty, a huge supporter of my collection, much like Mary probably did, said, "So where are we going with this?" Which brings me to the fourth intersection of our respective collections. The only thing better than gathering a collection is sharing with others and honoring the history of baseball. For Terry, that's the wonderful legacy that we celebrate today. For me, it came as an opportunity that coincided with the 100th anniversary of Fenway Park. The Red Sox were looking for memorabilia to display, and I sent them a book of pictures of my baseball bats. And a part-time assistant curator named Sarah Coffin of the Red Sox reached out to me, and the rest is literally history. I now have on loan with the Red Sox for display at Fenway Park a number of uniforms, catcher's equipment, and a rotating display of 36 game-used bats that we change every year. Sarah is now the Alumni Relations Coordinator and the team curator. And she and the Red Sox have been super to my family with guided tours, selfies with trophies, trips inside the Green Monster, and 250,000 fans a year, and the Fenway Park Ballpark tour standing in front of a display of part of my collection, which is incredibly gratifying for me, and I actually go and watch them, look at these and enjoy them. So I get a tremendous amount out of it. My collection was featured in the Boston Globe, and Sarah and I spoke about collecting Boston Red Sox memorabilia and history at the Library of Congress. Through this, I also built a great friendship with Gordon Eads, a sports writer and one-time historian for the Red Sox, which leads me to my final reliquary intersection, which is embrace the whimsy of baseball, because there's really magic in the game. In 2018, you all probably remember this, the Red Sox headed out here to Los Angeles for the World Series. Sorry about that. And Gordon called me and he asked me if I wanted to go. Actually, we were sitting in his office. At the time, I needed 2 players to complete my collection. And it just so happened that both of them lived in the Los Angeles area. So I said to Gordon, if I went, would he come with me to visit those 2 players and maybe complete my collection? He went one step further, and he called up Carmen Fanzone. The 2 players were Carmen Fanzone and Ken Polson. He called Carmen Fanzone while I was sitting there in his office and invited Carmen Fanzone to brunch. Carmen came, and after hearing my tale, he said not to worry, and a week later, a bat arrived at my house in Wayne, so down to 1. Unfortunately, the 1 was a gentleman named Ken Polson, who'd passed away the previous December. And this is where I swerve into my own kind of personal field of dreams experience. I knew that Polson played for the Red Sox for only 2 weeks in 1967. He was called up from Double-A. He never made it back to the majors, and while with the Red Sox, he only had 5 at-bats and 1 hit. He also converted to a pitcher in the minors after that, which just meant less bats for me. Now, some of you probably know that 1967 was a special year in Boston. Yastrzemski won the Triple Crown, and the Sox made this improbable run to the World Series only to lose in 7 games to Bob Gibson and the Cardinals. It's viewed as the rebirth of baseball in Boston, and the players are all considered heroes. Petrocelli, George Scott, all down to Tartable. There's just a whole list of players that are feted all the time. But my research at the time revealed a great injustice chronicled by Sabres super researcher and author Bill Nowlin. Despite appearing during the season, Polson was not voted a playoff share and did not receive an American League championship ring, even though players that only appeared in spring training and clubhouse staff were. Apparently, in part of this slight, he never returned for a team reunion. He never returned for the 100th anniversary, and this was despite the Red Sox asking him to do so. So the twisting road of my collection had led me to a final bat from a forgotten player on Boston's most unforgettable team. So cue shoeless Joe Jackson whispering in my ear, ease his pain. So I texted Gordon and I suggested the Red Sox should set this right. And the Red Sox did. They flew Polson's son and his family to Boston. And on July 12, 2019, 2 days short of the 52nd anniversary of Polson's lone major league hit, the Red Sox presented Polson's son with a 1967 American League championship ring struck from the original mold to formally commemorate his role on the Impossible Dream Team. Jim Lomborg, star of the team, delivered the ring to Polson's son, which was a surprise, on the mound before the game. And my son, Patrick, one of my sons, Patrick, and I were by the dugout on the field to witness it. Now, I still don't have a Polson bat, but I have this story that in many ways is very reliquarian, in some ways better, although I'd still like a bat. So just wrapping up, a few thank yous. Thank you to Terry and the Reliquary for the honor, which frankly, looking at the list of prior winners and their contributions is pretty humbling. To Mary and Joe, thank you for keeping the Reliquary alive, and the Library Foundation of Los Angeles for funding this fantastic event. Keep it going. Thanks to my fellow collectors who've helped me get bats over the years. I couldn't have built a collection without a group like this group that supported me. Thank you to my colleagues like my friend Ben Indek, who recognize the uniqueness, yes, crazy, but unique nature of my collection. Thank you to the group that I call the great Chicago sports writers, Mike Downey, Ron Rappaport, John Schulian, and Gordon Eads. And John, I see you in the audience today. They introduced me, Gordon introduced me to all of them on my trip to LA, and they gave me substantial credibility when talking with Carmen Fanzone. So thanks. Thank you to Sarah Coffin for allowing me to share my collection with all Red Sox fans, to collaborate on exhibits, and for being a great family friend. Thanks to Gordon Eads for his friendship and support of my collection. I have too many unforgettable moments to even describe them, and he's a baseball treasure. But finally, and most importantly, I'd like to thank my family, and particularly my wife, Patty. When we married 28 years ago, I had a few bats, so I always say, we're attorneys, I always say, there was full disclosure. She understood from the beginning that this is a refuge for me from a very stressful job, and she's been unfailingly supportive as a mountain of boxes have been delivered to our house and a pile of baseball bats has grown and other gear has grown. She's accompanied me on many buying trips and been quick with the one-liners, like the time I asked Fred Lynn to sign 2 of his game-used bats, and he looked up at me and he said, I always wondered where these went. And Patty, without missing a beat, said, they're in our attic. So thank you very much for this honor and for gathering today, and thank you to the library, and thank you to Terry for creating this wonderful place where we can all gather.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and thank you, Emma. The Tony Salin Memorial Award was established in 2002 to recognize individuals for their preservation of baseball history. The award is named for historian, archivist, and early reliquarian who died in 2001. Tony was adept at preserving the stories of unsung players and the histories of forgotten aspects of baseball games. For each presentation of this award since its inception, Tony's brother Doug has joined us from San Francisco, and he is accompanied today by Kim Shuck, the former poet laureate of the city of San Francisco. There. This year's Tony Salin Award goes to Alex Belth. As the editor of Esquire Classic, the magazine's digital repository, Alex is dedicated to preserving great journalism and writing about arts and culture. In addition, he manages his own website, The Stax Reader, which is a living archive of memorable storytelling. It is through the Stax Reader that Alex has honed his curatorial skills, gathering and sharing an astonishing mix of articles, essays, and long-form reportage. He digs out hidden gems from obscure and long-defunct publications. Among the writers whose baseball pieces Alex has preserved in his museum are stories by Pat Jordan, Ring Lardner, Peter Richmond, Diana Shaw, Red Smith, Wendell Smith, and more notably for us today, John Schulian, whose tribute to Terry Cannon and the Baseball Reliquary is among the essays that can be accessed in the Stax Reader. About Alex, Schulian himself has remarked that in little more than a decade, Belth has become the premier curator of baseball's press box literature. He can find the beauty in yellow dispatches from newspapers long dead, and he makes a winning case for baseball's place in the cultural zeitgeist. Before turning his passion to the Stax Reader, Alex was one of the original Yankee bloggers with his long-running Bronx banter. He is the author of numerous baseball essays and books, including Stepping Up, the story of Curt Flood and his fight for baseball players' rights, and another, Lasting Yankee Stadium Memories, Unforgettable Tales from the House That Ruth Built. Now let us hear from Alex.
Hi, this is Alex Belth, and thank you so much for the Tony Salin Award this year. It's a tremendous honor, and I'm deeply humbled to be acknowledged in this way. It's been my complete pleasure and joy to spread the word of great baseball writing over the last 20 years at Bronx Banter, at the Stax Reader, as well as my duties as the editor of Esquire Classic and mining that magazine's archives. I actually come from a pretty bookish family, and so as a kid, one of the things that I got as presents were not only books, but baseball books. Hey, he'll read a baseball book. And actually, I didn't read a baseball book for a long time. I had them, and I looked at the pictures a lot. But by the time I did get into reading, 10, 11, 12, there were the books of Roger Angell. That made me feel incredibly adult to be reading at that age. And years later, in my early 30s, when I got into writing about baseball, one of the ways that I really dove into it was through writing. And I always felt that baseball is something like, not that is exclusive to gender or to men, but for a lot of men, we relate on subjects or mutual interests. And I always felt like an interest in baseball was a way to connect with other men, particularly older men, people from different generations. You can learn about stuff, you can connect. And very early on in my writing career, I was lucky enough to meet writers who were super encouraging, like Alan Barra, Pat Jordan, Glenn Stout, John Schulian. I mean, Glenn Stout and John Schulian alone were instrumental in completely opening my eyes up to generations of different writers. And in John's case, writers that weren't specifically located in New York, Boston, or Los Angeles. I mean, people from all around the country. And it's through finding the works of those writers that are often neglected and being able to reprint them that, I stand here for you tonight with, this moment and sort of a really humble honor. Again, I know I'm repeating myself a little bit, but I'm doing this all in one take, and I do want to thank everyone a lot for this, because to me, the lifeblood of the game is the connections that we have, the storytelling that we have, and the stories were entrusted to people of incredible skill and talent, and they should be remembered. Be well.
Thank you, Alex, who I understand is participating via live stream today. Now it is time for us to induct the honorees into the Shrine of the Eternals and to unveil their plaques, newly and beautifully designed by reliquarian artist Greg Jaszewski. Please take time to marvel at two of his marvelous pieces that are featured in the Something in Common exhibit in the Getty Gallery here in the library. The three individuals whom we honor today were elected by members of the Baseball Reliquary in April 2020. While they are known as the Class of 2020, their plaques recognize this as the year for their formal induction. Please welcome Charles Adams to the podium to present the award for Rube Foster.
Joe and I have been going through Terry's stuff, collection, garage, storage box, and we have relics. Reliquaries contain holy objects. I think there are enough pieces of the true cross in reliquaries around the world to cause us to ask questions about their authenticity. We have some really interesting objects as well in the Baseball Reliquary. Some of them are true and some of them may not be. We don't know. One is this brick from the YMCA building in Kansas City, where Rube Foster convened the meeting founding the National Negro League. We're pretty sure it really is. So you may want to spend the next few minutes in contemplation of this brick, if you wish, while I blather on. We do have a relic in the house. Andrew Bishop Rube Foster. Rube Foster was the only person to have appeared as a nominee for the Shrine of the Eternals on every ballot since the inception of the honor, failing to gain election until the current class. The question is why it took so long. I have some ideas about this that I'll outline in a bit, but that he is now in the shrine is what is important in the end. In the debates about how the Baseball Hall of Fame should handle black ball players before integration, debates that more or less culminated in the 1970s, leading to the election of a number of black players to the Hall of Fame. What seems to have been asked very often was not whether Rube Foster belonged, but why he was not the first black player, manager, executive so honored. It took until 1981 for Foster to be elected. The debate about Rube Foster now seems to be really about whether or not he was the greatest pitcher in black baseball, maybe the best all-around player. Maybe, in some, he was better at his craft than Oscar Charleston, Josh Gibson, Satchel Paige, etc. Get over to page 2 here somewhere. He was an intellectual. Applying those skills to analysis and techniques in the game is clear. That he was also the driving engine of the foundation of the Negro National League is without dispute. Clearly enough, is there anyone really out there more deserving, more important, more crucial? But why so relatively late? And again, why did it take so long for the Shrine of the Eternals? In addition to what is in your program, we do need a few facts for this brief discussion. There are lots, but I'll leave all of you to follow up. You can look it up. I think there's a phrase from baseball. Foster was born in 1879 to parents who had both been slaves. He began to play more or less organized baseball in 1897. Over the course of his career, he played for a variety of teams in a variety of places, all, of course, in the subculture of segregated baseball. What we know of his record was that he was a dominant pitcher, pretty much wherever he appeared. And we know that he had some occasions to play with and against white players who knew who he was. Most accounts credit him with teaching Christy Mathewson a pitch known as the fadeaway. Connie Mack employed him to work with catchers. He acquired the nickname of Rube from being compared to the white pitcher Rube Waddell, or so the story goes. There's some interesting things about Rube Waddell to know. On his plaque in the Hall of Fame, the lead line is rated foremost manager and executive in the history of the Negro Leagues. And in Foster's case, there's no doubt about his brilliance in various executive functions, leading to his organization of the Negro National League in 1920. That makes him a crucial cultural figure. I assume you know that the Negro Leagues were significant economic entities, along with their major league level of play, now accepted as such by folks in Cooperstown. Teams were black-owned, black-managed, successful businesses, at least in a number of significant cases. A side note is that desegregation put all those organizations out of business. It's hard to know what to think about that. Rube Foster was a clear driving engine of this significant element of American cultural history. So we come back to the question that has until now bedeviled the reliquary as it did that other Hall of Fame. One answer may be that it is now so obvious to reliquarians that Rube Foster's accomplishments are transcendent that he did not need election. The folks in the baseball establishment had taken care of that, and the reliquary tends to value the most candidates whose presence in the various stories about baseball have no other place to be honored. Babe Ruth is not in. Stan Musial is not in. It goes on. But wait, there are big names who are. I guess I can't finally answer the question in a way but to say that Foster's election here plays out the way things so often do in our culture. We are not always logical. We have blind spots. We are not well educated about too many things. All matters that involve race are troubled. But the reliquary is about getting the story told in a way that respects the parts of the story that are under the surface, asking us to ask questions about the sport we love. Rube Foster's story is about brilliance with an undertow of tragedy, the tragedy of race in America, but also in a troubled personal life. Rube Foster's story is difficult as much as it is inspirational. He died in 1930 in a mental asylum, probably there due to brain damage due to near asphyxiation due to a gas leak in a hotel heater. He did not live long enough to see integration, something I'm sure he would have welcomed. And in 1930, the Depression was ramping up, taking a huge toll on the Negro National League as it did on every other business. Perhaps those troubled parts of his story are what we need to acknowledge here at the reliquary. Had he lived longer and with peace in his own mind, who knows what more he might have done. And it was all now a long time ago. Maybe Foster's story is just harder to see now than those of the bright lights of those who came after him. It is a pleasure to induct him. I think Doug Foster is here today. Did he make it? Come on down.
First off, I just want to thank the Baseball Reliquary for this great honor, as well as everyone else who played a part in putting this event together. In 1981, I had the opportunity to travel with my father to Cooperstown to be a part of my uncle's induction into the Major League Hall of Fame. At that point in time, I was 10 years old, didn't really know much about my uncle, was just happy to be going on vacation with my father to New York. So didn't know much about him. Everybody was talking about him, but didn't know what he did or what he accomplished. Fast forward to 1996, I'm 25 years old. I traveled back up to Cooperstown for my grandfather's, Bill Foster's induction to Baseball Hall of Fame. And again, even at that point in time, even though I was older, I was still had more of a personal connection to my grandfather, so I was all about my grandfather. He's probably known as the second best pitcher in the Negro League. I will argue he's better than Satchel Paige, but that's just me. But yeah, so I was all, there was talk about my uncle then, but still I was just, I had an opportunity to establish a relationship with my grandfather, so I was all about my grandfather. It wasn't until a couple years leading up to, obviously 2020, the 100-year anniversary of the Negro Leagues, where there was a lot of discussion about Rube and a lot of people reaching out to me, where I finally realized and looked into it about how much of a significant figure Rube was in baseball history. Obviously, he was a great dominant pitcher. He was a great manager, as it stays in your program. He introduced the hit and run, the drag bunt, the squeeze play, defensive shifts. He was a baseball genius. There was two things that he wanted to do. He wanted to improve the lives of African Americans through baseball, and he also wanted to integrate African American players into the major league. And he thought the best way to do that was to establish their own league, because he thought that was a way to showcase the great talents of African Americans on a scale never seen before. So after a couple failures, he finally succeeded in 1920. And I think what was significant about that is he created the blueprint for other leagues to follow. So now you had successful Negro leagues where players can go and play and show their talents throughout the country. And I think, and it's probably not talked about as much, but I think that ultimately led to the integration of Negro leagues into baseball, because you couldn't deny that African-American ball players was just as good, if not better, than their white counterparts. So I appreciate the award, the acknowledgement. Rube was a great baseball player, great pitcher, but he was significant in the fact that I think he's probably known as the most significant figure in African-American baseball, probably second to Jackie Robinson. And I think ultimately his creation of the Negro League ultimately led probably to the integration of black players in baseball, because those leagues was able to continue to be successful. People could see their talents, and at some point in time, you just couldn't ignore how great Negro League players were. So again, thank you for the award, and I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you so much there, Doug and Charles. When Max Patkin's daughter, Joy, indicated that she would be unable to participate in the shrine induction ceremony, she identified Greg DeHart as the best person to represent her and the memory of her father. An Emmy Award winner, as well as the recipient of several filmmaking honors, Greg is completing a documentary entitled Max Patkin, the Clown Prince of Baseball. After Greg's presentation, the award will be accepted by reliquarian Ron Shelton, who featured Max in two scenes in his classic film Bull Durham, one in which we surprisingly hear Mimer Max's voice. Please welcome Greg to the podium to present the award.
Thank you, everybody. What an honor this is. I actually am Ron Shelton's warm-up band, so bear with me here. I was lucky enough to have an encounter with Max in 1980. I was a minor league baseball player. I played for 5 years, and to be honest with you, I never realized it, but my stat line would be perfect for the Baseball Reliquary. But I had an encounter with Max Patkin when I was pitching one night in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And as things, as normal, were going not very well for me. There were people on base. I had guys on base. My arm wasn't feeling so good. And I was on the road, and the crowd was pretty fired up. And that's when I caught a glimpse on the side of this man in this disheveled uniform walking out to the mound, this goofy-looking man. And he got out to the mound, and he got right up in my face. And he was gesturing like a coach for like scolding me for the mess that I'd gotten myself into. And I looked at him and I told him to get off the mound. As you know, pitchers think they own the mound, right? And he looked at me and he said, "Just go with it, kid, just go with it." And he continued to gesture. And he said, "The crowd loves it." And the crowd did love it. Well, a couple years later, I was released. And he continued on for about another 10 years at that point. But when I became a documentary filmmaker, I wanted to do something on the minor leagues, but that was kind of a really big, thing. You can't, what's the hook here? And I remembered my time with Max Patkin. And so I decided to do a documentary on his life. So I'm going to tell you just a couple of kind of key things that I've learned that, I think are really, really interesting about his life. First of all, he was a pitcher. He was a really good pitcher. He was signed by the Chicago White Sox, and he had this really high leg kick, like higher than Juan Marichal. It was way, way up there. And he threw really hard, but he was wild. And one of the things that I hear a lot about, and going through all the footage of him, he's told this story over and over. He said, "I had a pretty good record my first year in professional baseball. I had 32 wild pitches. It's still a record to this day." And one of those pitches actually knocked out a sports writer in the press box. Anyway, when I picked up the program, the first thing I look at and I see is like there's talking about Max Patkin, and it's about his Joe DiMaggio game, and I was gonna I want to tell the story about how he kind of got started, but I'm going to do it anyways. So Max, he's got his minor league career going, and then here comes World War II, and it interrupts his career, and he joins the Navy, and he has the greatest military assignment of all time, and that's to play baseball in Honolulu to entertain the troops. So, I'm sure most of you know that, when, in World War II, a lot of major league players would go around the country and perform for troops to entertain them. And sure enough, Max gets to pitch against one of these all-star major league teams, and he gets to pitch against Joe DiMaggio. The first time DiMaggio is up, he hits a home run off of him. Excuse me, that's not right. The first time he's up, he strikes out Joe DiMaggio. The second time, DiMaggio hits a blast that Max would always say is still bobbing around in the South Pacific somewhere. But what happens next changes Max's life forever. This spontaneous act where Max throws down his glove and chases Joe DiMaggio around the bases, stride for stride. And DiMaggio, as I'm sure most of you know, had this really brilliant kind of loping gait, and he's mimicking him around the bases. And by the time they get to home plate, both dugouts have emptied and are now congratulating Max Patkin, the guy who threw the home run pitch. A star in a career is born. He goes back to the minor leagues after the war, and he starts, at the urging of Joe DiMaggio, start clowning around on the days that he's not pitching. And they allow them to do that in the minor leagues. And then he hurts his arm, and he gets released. Welcome. He gets released. 2 days later, Bill Veeck calls him up. "I want you to come up to Cleveland and perform that goofy stuff that you're doing in the minor leagues." And sure enough, Max goes up, and his first game, 80,000 people in Municipal Stadium in Cleveland. They're honoring Babe Ruth, Tress Speaker, and Ty Cobb. And he crushes it. The next day in the Chicago newspapers, the headline is, "Clown Convulses Crowd." Now, he has a game act. Al Schacht, who was the clown prince of baseball at the time, his act was before the games. But Max's act is during the game, and he's disrupting the game. Well, it doesn't take long until the players and coaches and managers and general managers start to complain and say, this guy's disrupting the game. This is not okay. So the commissioner sends him down to the minor leagues. And from that day on began the longest road trip in baseball history. Max, for the next 50 years, performed from one small little town to the next, 5,000 performances, without once missing a performance. His act was brilliant. It was comic genius. He was a physical comic that used everything he had. Most importantly, his looks. He described his looks all the time. He always made fun of his looks. Bill Veeck used to say that he made homely ugly. But he was able to use his looks in a way that he entertained the crowd. Not only is he doing his act over, he's doing his act over at first base, where he mimics the first baseman. He goes over to third base and he's waving runners around in the middle of the game. He's doing a brilliant geyser routine where he takes a big glass, a sip of water, and starts to spray it out slowly, 10 times, 20 times. The crowd is just, going crazy with each additional one, 30 times, 40 times. And he did this act over and over again, and the crowds loved it. He would engage the crowd. He would engage the crowds. Have you ever seen an uglier person than me? And he would, give his smile with one tooth. But he was able to, use what he had. No one has ever made more chicken soup out of chicken you-know-what than Max Patkin, I gotta say. His durability was remarkable. The 50 years continuing on. As Don Zimmer says in our documentary, he says, as a player, you go around and, you're going on a road trip and you stay in a town for 3 or 4 days. Max would go into a town, he would do his act, and he would get in the shower and he would go to the next town and do it again tomorrow night, and do it again tomorrow night, and do it again tomorrow night. This is a man who lived for the laughter. He lived to make, his biggest thing was making kids smile and their families smile. And he brought the sense of joy to a baseball game that was unmatched. So he's toiling around through the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s. He's toiling through the minor leagues year after year after year. And then in the 1980s come in the mascots in the big leagues. Now, they're allowed to perform in the big leagues because they're not interrupting the games. The chicken comes in, the Philly Fanatic. Great entertainers in their own right. And they're getting this recognition on the national stage. Whereas Max is, he's in Wichita, Kansas, getting headlines. Not that there's anything wrong with Wichita, Kansas. And that is until in 1988, that gentleman right there, Ron Shelton, casts him in Bull Durham. And from that moment on, Max got the recognition that he deserved, and it solidified his place in baseball history to the whole country. He, at that point, carries around this amazing sense of pride. And then in 1993, he's still going at it. He's in his late 70s at this point. And this is a man who rolled around on the ground. He was a physical comic. It wore him down. He had so many different ailments over the years. He broke his back. He broke every finger. It went on and on. But during a rare off day, he goes to see his good buddy, Johnny Pesky, at Fenway Park. And before the game, they're walking up to the field. And as he's walking up to the field through the dugout, he trips on the dugout steps at Fenway Park. And he severely sprains his ankle to where he cannot make his next performance in Connecticut the next night or the next one after that. And essentially, it's the end of his career. 50 years, 5,000 performances, and he trips at Fenway Park. And here, I mean, you think of the bookends of his career. He started with Joe DiMaggio in Hawaii, and he ends it at Fenway Park. I mean, we should all be so lucky, right? So what I learned, what I've learned doing, being just completely immersed in his life over the last year, it takes me back to that first night that I met him. When I was playing, I was like this. You're just uptight. And he taught me that baseball is entertainment. Don't relax, have fun. Ron did an interview for the documentary, and one of the things he said about that was, if you let the clown laugh and make you laugh, it's liberating. And it also just gave me just this amazing kind of remembering what baseball was from when I was a kid. And now today, I can actually watch a baseball game and see it as entertainment. And that's because of Max Patkin. No one's done it better. He's the greatest clown in the history of baseball, the greatest, in my opinion, the greatest entertainer in the history of baseball. So, first of all, I want to say I wish I'd known Terry, because this is really, Max would love this. This is his kind of jam right here. I'm working with Max, and his daughter Joy. I've been privy to a lot of the different items that he saved. He saved a lot of things over his life, and he saved his appointment books that have in his writing where he was every single night, how much money he made every single night. I mean, it's an amazing, amazing book. Anyway, it's from his 1971 season, and I know that he would love for you guys to have this. So,
I'd
like to see it. That's Max Patkin. Thank you.
Yeah, Max hated the chicken. He told me that. He thought his act was crude, he was overpaid, and he was in the big leagues where Max belonged. I will keep it brief because I could talk till cocktail hour about Max, but Greg, that was great. To put in context, when I came across Max, this was the late 60s, early 70s, when I played baseball professionally. Many of us know, looking around at my colleagues here, Vietnam War was raging. Civil rights movement was everywhere. Cities were on fire. Chicago burned. Cleveland burned. The river in Cleveland burned because it was so polluted. Remember that? And they couldn't put it out. Ball players were trying to avoid getting drafted and a lot of times going off to do National Guard so we wouldn't go to Vietnam. I was marching in the off-season against the war in Vietnam, which I couldn't talk about during the season because those things weren't done. It was a crazy time. It was also the time of sex, drugs, rock and roll, acid rock. Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, and they all died in the same year. The same year of his route book, actually, of Max's route book I was looking at. In the middle, at spring training one year, MLK was assassinated, and late in the year, when I was there, rooming with Winston Presley from Compton, I'll never forget, and the divisiveness that caused. This was new to me. I'm from Southern California. I was always the minority on the team. And my mom went to high school with Jackie Robinson at John Muir High School in Pasadena. It's a hard time to describe, and through it all, we were playing baseball. And somewhere in one of those leagues I played in, the Appalachian League to the California League to the Texas League, the International League, and somewhere in there, winter ball in Florida. Before a game, I was in the clubhouse and I heard Rock Around the Clock blasting out, and I went out to the dugout, and this goofy-looking guy comes out just before the game, and he's doing these fairly sexual dance twerk-type numbers before twerk is a word. And now he's rolling around, throwing dirt in the air on him. It's about 98 degrees in all those leagues I played in. And then Greg says, marching out to the mound to interrupt. He's coaching first base. He's sending runners to second when they shouldn't go. I love this guy, and I'm going back into the clubhouse. I say, you got to see this. Oh, that's Max. He's not funny. And I say, this guy is so funny. Now, keep in mind, this is when they're making movies about Lenny Bruce, when, we're on the verge of Richard Pryor bursting on the scenes. And I'm there laughing with all the kids in Amarillo, Texas, equally moved. And I discovered that every season, he'd sometimes come to your town, or maybe a road trip, or maybe two if you got lucky. And I would watch, I would be out there early to see everything he did. We got to Amarillo in the Texas League, and as it comes back to me now, it was the third time we tried to cause a rainout by flooding the field, as you know from the movie. And that wasn't because we were clowns. It was because I was a middle infielder and we had no days off. You play 160 games in the Texas League, you're beat. You're trying to get days off. And so late in the season, we got to Amarillo, and we were fighting for fourth or fifth place, both the Amarillo Giants and us, the Oriole team out of Dallas-Fort Worth. And I got to second base on a Friday night, and the shortstop, Chris Spire, who later was a big San Francisco Giant, he says, hey, I heard you guys flooded the field in Little Rock. And I said, why? He says, we want to flood it. We'll meet you there tonight. I got half the team. And I said, well, I'll pass the word, but I don't know. Well, it turns out that night, there was like 25 out of 50 guys were there, from what I'm told, smoking something from Humboldt County or Texas. But I didn't really want to go out to the ballpark that night. That left me alone in the hotel in Amarillo. And these are not fine hotels. And imagine when you're in AA, there's 4 leagues lower than this. You've had to fight your way to get here. And I went to have a beer at the bar, and Max Patkin was sitting next to me. Now, for all those years, I'd never talked to him. I just laughed at him. And I said, Max, hi, I'm Ron. I play second base. And he acts like he knows you, even though I'm just another one of 10,000 minor leaguers. And he says, great, have a seat. And he told me his life story for the next 3 hours. Everything, it was a novel, it was a mini-series, everything. And then it got very sad. His wife ran off with another woman, which still really steamed him. How could that happen? And the fact that he lived on the road, and it was the greatest life ever, and that goddamn chicken in San Diego making all the money. I saw him again somewhere in AAA when I got to International League. I don't remember where, but that was the only time I'd ever spoken to him. Cut to 15 years later. I'm now writing movies, and I've got a chance to direct something that I've written because I made a contract that only I could direct it. But I was writing the script, and I started off, I didn't know where I was going. I just wrote a book about I didn't know what I was doing, or I didn't have a plan anyway, and It's called The Church of Baseball. And I wrote the first 2 pages. Annie Savoy, I believe in the Church of Baseball. I've worshiped all the major religions and most of the minor ones. You know that. And she walks to the ballpark. It's all in the script. And when she gets to the ballpark, the last thing she says is, I've tried them all, I really have, and the only church that matters or that delivers day in, day out is the Church of Baseball. What is the next thing she sees? It's Max Patkin. Because when I got through that speech, I thought, I'm going to get killed for this speech. They're going to say it's too poetic or too nobody's like this or people don't talk. I knew women who talked like this. They just weren't baseball fans. But that was my conceit. I thought, I've had enough of this crazy chick. I need Max. I need Max. And so he's actually on page 3 of the script. And there's other scenes that got cut out of him, not because of him, because they didn't belong. Now, much to my surprise, the movie is a huge success. And just before it opens, we got a sense maybe it's going to be successful because the reviews are coming in. And there's something that they call a press junket, which is a studio will bring in press from all over the country, like usually a studio will come in or 2 studios, and 3 or 4 different movies will be screened, and there'll be 2 or 3 days set up where they do interviews with the stars and the director. And I mean, it is a real junket. It's a cushy gig if you can get it if you're a reporter somewhere coming out in LA. And our junket was at the Century Plaza Hotel because the studio was a block away. Now, the Century Plaza was maybe one of only 5-star hotels in LA at that moment, and I know they've just redone it. But I knew it as the place. I'd never been in it, and I was used to Amarillo Hotel still. And Century Plaza was famous for, that's where presidents stayed. And they had a presidential suite that was overlooked everything, and it was multiple rooms. And the PR person for Orion Studios said for me to come over to look at the arrangement. This is where the interviews, this is where the screening will be. And she said, I want to show you something special. And she took me up to the presidential suite, and she said, this is for you to stay for 3 days. And I said, I have a house, I have a home. And then I said, wait a minute. Have you invited Max Patkin to come and be interviewed with Kevin Costner and Susan Sarandon and Tim and Robert Wool? No, I said, get him on the phone. I'm sure he's in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. Only person I ever knew who lived there that wasn't in a Bob and Ray comedy bit. And she said, really? I said, you've got it. You can't, junket doesn't work without Max. She said, I will. I said, and give him this presidential suite. And Max, they flew him out immediately. He took one look at it. It was practically in tears, and he said, can I bring my brother out to stay with me? And we said, we flew his brother out. So I would say that 2 of the most satisfying things in my career have been being able to give Max Patkin the presidential suite at Century Plaza and being able to accept this for him today. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg and Ron. Bob Costas, recipient of more Emmy Awards than a team has outs in a 9-inning game, Bob Costas began his broadcasting career at KMOX in St. Louis, the city he came to call home. Initially, he filled the radio station's roles as a Cub reporter and as a co-host of a call-in program. The sportscasting direction of his career took off a couple years later when he started to provide play-by-play of regional college and professional basketball games, which led shortly thereafter to his being hired by NBC. Then for almost 4 decades on that network, he articulately called games and hosted events for multiple sports like football and hockey, and with conversational ease, he hosted the telecasts of the Olympics, the Kentucky Derby, golf tournaments, and even a NASCAR race. Still, I think there's a hole in the panoply of his broadcasting experience. Where is the world's most popular sport in his fields of broadcast? Football. Nowhere. But that doesn't matter. There's enough baseball to fill the gaps. While he delivers his commentary with the air of an expert, he doesn't take himself too seriously. On air, Bob is quick to acknowledge his play-by-play mistakes, and he has satirized his own style of broadcasting and announcing by announcing dog sled and elevator races on Late Night with David Letterman. As smooth as he is in calling whichever game or event it is that he has been assigned, he is at his very best when he is narrating and analyzing baseball games. Simply, baseball is in Bob's bones. He grew up revering Mickey Mantle, and as an adult, he often carried number 7's baseball card in his wallet. Yet he dealt with Mantle's faults and flaws honestly, ethically, and philosophically, as he also does when reflecting on the plague of PED use that tainted a generation of Diamond Stars. In the eulogy that Costas delivered at Mantle's funeral, he offered this sage reflection, grounded in baseball, yet scoring with hits about life itself. I quote, "It has been said that the truth is never pure and rarely simple. Mickey Mantle was too humble and honest to believe that the whole truth about him could be found on a Wheaties box or a baseball card. But the emotional truths of childhood have a power that transcend objective fact. They stay with us through all the years, withstanding the ambivalence that so often accompanies the experience of adults. That's why we can still recall the immediate tingle in that instant of recognition when a Mickey Mantle popped up in a pack of Topps bubblegum cards, a treasure lodged between an Eli Gerba and a Pumpsy Green. Not only is Bob gifted with a mellifluous voice and skilled with a conversational style, he understands the complexities of fandom and the human condition, because Bob is a thinking fan. Let's now hear from Bob.
To join the Shrine of the Eternals this year, along with Rube Foster and Max Patkin. Now, Rube and Max are already in eternity. In my case, let's not rush it, but still, I get and appreciate the significance. And so, many thanks to Joe Price and Mary Cannon. And I really wish that Terry Cannon could be there as well. Hell, I wish that I could be there. But as you all know, one of the distinguishing characteristics of the Baseball Reliquary has always been a certain quirkiness. And so naturally, this year, they scheduled a ceremony for November 5th, which also happens to be the scheduled date of the 7th game of the World Series, if they got that far. If I didn't have a certain and still ongoing connection to baseball, I'd be of no interest to the folks at the Reliquary. And so I told them, look, if the Dodgers make it to the World Series, which we might have reasonably expected, I can be there. If the Padres somehow sneak in, maybe I could drive up the coast and back. But none of that happened. So the best I can do is express my thanks from a distance. As the great Jim Bouton said, the Baseball Reliquary and the Shrine of the Eternals is the People's Hall of Fame. And that's why Jim himself is in. That's why Rube and Max are in. That's why Nancy Faust is in. That's why Mark Fidrich and Bill Lee are in. Hell, that's why the San Diego Chicken is in, and on and on. And to join that distinguished list means, I hope, that beyond a certain competence, I've been able to project a certain sensibility, maybe a sense of humor, certainly an appreciation for what baseball means to so many of us. It has the deepest and richest history. It has the greatest texture. And that texture is enhanced by all the wonderful and quirky characters that are part of its history. Baseball, more so than any other game, has a capacity for humor and high drama and everything in between. I thank the Baseball Reliquary and the Shrine of the Eternals for recognizing that and for including me on that list. Thank you so very much.
Bob's words provide the sign-off for the formal portion of this ceremony. Thank you, Bob. Now for the post-game briefly, I need to deal with a few reliquary matters. First, I invite you, I implore you to renew your memberships in the reliquary and to find new ways to support it. The viability of the reliquary depends on enlarging our membership and securing new resources to be able to continue programming, especially the Shrine election and induction ceremony. This year's program would not have been possible without the incredible support and staffing provided by the Library Foundation of Los Angeles, to whom we owe so much for this joyful gathering. Item 2, because of technical difficulties and drastic inefficiencies of the website host, the Reliquary's website disappeared on January 1st, 2021. Although an archival site has been restored, an interactive site is under development and should be accessible soon. It will be announced on the Facebook page. Item 3. Now that we have dealt with these housekeeping details, let's gather in the courtyard for refreshments and conversation after you renew your memberships and return the cowbells. Thank you very much. Oh. Bob, I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
All good. Let's get some pictures with the folks
Yeah.
up here.